record button. Great. Good morning and welcome to SIG-Apps on September 12th, 2016. We have a really fun agenda today. First up is Tuna from Skippbox, and he's going to talk to us about kompose with a K. And then we'll review the rest of the doc for the proposed technical items that we'll maybe focus on during Kubernetes 1.5. So do we have any volunteers to take minutes for today? One volunteer? A volunteer? Don't be shy. Okay, fine. I'll take him. Okay, so let's go ahead and hand it over to Tuna.
Hi, hello everyone. So can I share my screen now? Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so can you share my screen? So I'm going to introduce kompose developed by Skippbox, and we got some help from other contributors, including Janet Cure from Google and Thomas and Surai from Red Hat. Let me introduce a little bit about myself. I'm Tu Nguyen, you can call me Tuna. I'm a master's student at University of Basel, Switzerland, and I'm Apache Software Foundation committers, contributing to Apache Cloud Stack project. And I'm a former Google Summer Code student in 2013. Also, I'm Kubernetes contributor. I wrote part of Cloud Stack Provider for Kubernetes, and you can find me on Twitter at ngtuna11. So at Skippbox, we are developing a Kubernetes toolbox, and you can compare to Docker toolbox, but for Kubernetes. For Docker machine, we have K-machine, and for boot to Docker, we have boot to Kubernetes, but now mostly users see the popular Minikube. And for Kissmatic, we have Skippbox UI, but is working in process. And so how about Docker Compose? We have Compose project is available on GitHub and written in Golang. So basically, Compose will take a Docker Compose file and translate it into Kubernetes primitive. And we use Leaf Compose, Golang version of Docker Compose, as the library to have take the Docker Compose file and read it and then translate it into Kubernetes objects. So why we do that? Because we see now developers use Docker to create images, and then they will write compose file to compose application. So, and then deploy to, for example, Swarm cluster. But how about deploy to Kubernetes? We want to give them the ability to move to Kubernetes easily. It means that take the compose file and translate to Kubernetes objects. So yeah, it's really a quick introduction, and I'm gonna jump to the demo. As you see in the last slide, Compose now support 3 main subcommands. Convert. Compose converts mean convert Docker Compose file to object. Compose off is something similar to Docker Compose off to like deploy your Compose application to Kubernetes transparently. And also in contrast to Compose off, we have Compose down will delete your application from Kubernetes. That's all for the introduction, and I will show you some simple demo. We just release Compose version. The latest version is 0.1.0. So is basically a tool have Docker Compose user move to Kubernetes, and we have 3 commands here. I got some example here. Let's say we will take the Docker the guestbook application, I will show you the compo file guestbook, and we'll take it and translate it and deploy to Kubernetes. Let's say we have compo, we figure out the file, guestbook, and off. And then basically, we're going to create the deployment and services and by default. And if you need different kind of resources, you can use compo convert and kube control create. But now you have the creating, you have deployment and service. We have 3 layers, the front end, the Redis master, and Redis slave. Okay, takes some, I think there's some seconds. I have already running Kubernetes cluster with a right config, kube control config. So it's really straightforward. Okay, we have the app running, and we can use proxy to accept into the application at this URL front end at 80, and we have the guestbook. Hello, SIG-App. Okay, I already have it. So the first demo, the first application, and in case you don't want it anymore, you can use compo, figure out the file, Docker guestbook, and just down. And then compo will take the file, read the content, and send the API request to Kubernetes cluster to delete the application. Really handy. And you check it, it's terminating. Take some second, and the app is gone. Meanwhile, I will show you another demo with the bundle format already announced in Docker version 1.12. I have the Docker voting application, the example from Docker, but in bundle format like this. We have the Postgre database, Redis, the result, the vote, and the worker application. A 3-component application, you know, and it's in bundle format. So let me check if the app already gone. Yeah, the guestbook already gone, and I will deploy another with the bundle format. You can, for example, convert it, figure out with the bundle flag, Docker voting bundle, and you have your own choice to like generating, for example, the replication controller or diamond set like this. And you see that we create the service will be created by default and together with the diamond set and replication controller. And then you can use kube control to create it. But I will show you another way with the compo app. Before I do that, I show you another option for convert. Let's see, we have the deployment diamond sets and deployment config for OpenShift. We have replication controller. You can also figure out the replicas number, and also you can generate the Helm chart deployment. And we support also the YAM format. So let's say if you want to convert this bundle format, Docker voting bundle to chart. So we generate the content for the chat, and we store in the Docker voting bundle folder. You have here, and let's see what inside. We have the chart and the template. Okay, let's check it out. Yeah, it is a short description and so on, and the whole template in the whole object will be stored in template folder. Okay, so I'm gonna deploy the Docker voting application in bundle format to Kubernetes with I've figured out the flag bundle, a Docker voting bundle. Okay, so again, it will by default generating the deployment and services for the voting application, and then deploy to Kubernetes. Let's check it a little bit.
Hey, Tuna, where's that warning coming from? The service cannot be created because of missing.
Yeah, because the Kubernetes service cannot be created if the compose service missing the pod. I mean, in Docker perspective, compose application can be still running with like embedded exposed TCP port, but without figure out the TCP port in Docker compose file or bundle format. But in Kubernetes, the port is required in manifest. So if you do not figure out the service port, that Kubernetes cannot create the Kubernetes service, right? So it means the worker service is gonna be great, but another one is created normally. And you see that we have the file layer of application running, and again I use kube control proxy to like proxy the connection, and again just change the URL vote. I remember is 18. Yeah, so I have the application here, but it is quite a little bit difficult to access the result page with kube control proxy, because the result page has redirect the URL. So I have to change the result service from cluster IP to, for example, to node port, and then let me check it. Okay, and then let's check result and see the port, which port is spawned on Kubernetes Minion, and I will take the IP. I'm deploying Kubernetes. I will deploy Kubernetes on Amazon. Again, check the port. So here we have the result page, and let's vote for doc. And doc will be 100%, and let's vote for cat. And cat will be 100%. Okay. So the alpha worked really well on Kubernetes. I think that's all for the demo. If you have any question, please let me know.
Does anybody have questions for Tuna? Thanks for this demo. This is really cool.
Quick question, and I know this was something that Helm had to deal with. What happens when you have one person who creates and another person who wants to change or destroy later from the same config? Have you worked on any of that yet?
Right now we like we the support to like take the input file generating the object and with compose off you deploy to Kubernetes. But well, who knows? Anyone has changed the configuration. We don't guarantee
Okay.
the change. Yep.
Okay. How much of this is bundled into a library that another thing could import? Is it mostly an application with logic, or does the application wrap a library that does some of this? I'm a little curious of the architecture.
With the bundle format, actually, we use the lib compo project from Docker, and they support the function to like take the bundle format and passing to the object, and then we take the object and translate to Kubernetes primitives. We relying on the libcompo project.
But Tuna, the the loader for the different files and the transformers, they're in a package.
Yeah, yeah,
so people could actually import the package and write their own stuff.
Yeah.
But we do provide the CLI, which is Compose.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Has anybody on this call used Compose?
I have.
Quick question. Maybe I missed something. What happened when we rebuild, I mean edit compose files? Does it use existing containers?
If you rebuild, like if you edit your compose file, then you have to re-upload, re-convert and redeploy your application. Compose right now cannot detect the chain in compose file.
So it will be new containers, if I understand correctly.
Yeah, if you like, yeah.
Okay, thanks.
But that's good feedback. We haven't looked at that workflow yet. So the idea is really to move people from Compose to Kubernetes, and then they use kube control. We could build more logic in Compose itself so that they can do things like this, but yeah, we haven't done it yet.
Yeah.
Clayton, can you talk about your experience with Compose? Do you want to talk about? Thanks.
Yeah, I mean, I've spent a fair amount of time working with Tomasz and Suraj as well on the Compose stuff. I mean, the interesting thing is that I found that a lot of Compose files are either incredibly hacked together, very specific, only works if every assumption all lines up, or are simple, well-composed images that, like, where the image author has put a fair amount of time into their image, and that was usually the two extremes, right? That somebody like hacks together a very complex setup that is incredibly fragile, or they're using well-made base images that can be easily parameterized. And like the middle ground is actually kind of surprisingly rare. Well put together, complex Compose templates that are themselves parameterizable in an effective way. And it's mostly, I think that gets back to things like that we've seen in OpenShift and that we have almost certainly going to see in Helm and charts and other things, is that it takes a lot of effort to build a truly reusable component, and most people don't bother, whether that's an image or a compose file. So
yeah, right now we are working to support more and more options from compose format, but we do not guarantee to like 100% convert the compose file into because for example, we found that like the volume hotspot configuration, we cannot make it on Kubernetes, or the network configuration from compose, we cannot do it on Kubernetes. So we suggest, we highly recommend user to like use compose for a draft conversion and then recheck the manifest.
and that really does match our philosophy. Like, if we didn't think that the Kubernetes API objects solved the right problems, we should be changing the Kubernetes objects until they can. But because you're converting from one format to another, there's always going to be some fidelity loss. So I think that's very reasonable philosophically. Like in practice, and I think this is like maybe a SIG-Apps in general thing that we should talk about as well, which is the use cases that we hit trying to build apps on Kubernetes are things that are very, can't emphasize this enough, really do need to be fed back in as improvements to API objects and smoothing out the path. So like things that we hit while writing Helm charts for secret generation or for parameterization do need to be fed back into the individual objects. Things hit while updating deployments. If you can't build real apps with the things that we have in Kube, we shouldn't be doing what we're doing. So I think we probably want to, as we move it out of 1.5, want to spend a little bit of time talking about, have like a feedback session where people who have written real things with Helm charts and with OpenShift templates and with compose files, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We get some of that stuff. And we talked about this in the last session as well, but just worth reemphasizing.
I have something to add to that, Clayton. So I think, something came up in the community meeting, I think it was 2 weeks ago. So the CoreOS guys were doing a demo on a third-party resource implementation with a controller for etcd. And I said, doesn't PetSet solve etcd? And they said, well, no.
Yeah. I
said, well, what doesn't it solve? So I think there's this whole interesting, and whether it's philosophical or not, but there's going to probably have to be this market created of third-party resources, because we're going to have to put boundaries on where the APIs go. But if PetSets isn't solving things like etcd, or if it's the wrong use case, I think we need to call that out. I in my travels with Helm charts with PetSets, found that maybe there was a better way, whether it was a downwards API or something. We were missing some elements that became funky glue in shell scripts inside the templates, which I didn't necessarily like. But, whether we go to init containers or whether we go to custom controllers and third-party resources, I think we're going to need to come in and actually discuss that according to how we deploy applications. So watch this space. I think it's interesting.
Yeah, I think that's actually really important to emphasize. We don't do enough of that. Like when we say PetSets are available, PetSets are like a replication controller, but if you need to build something on top of it, replication controller isn't enough. And so we created deployments on top, and PetSets still have to evolve. I think it would be good, and I think this is really tough because the feedback loop that we're really trying to have is that the people developing on the individual parts of the product are taking this feedback. And it's been a little challenging, I think, even so far with SIG-Apps, just making sure that we are involved in all the other SIGs and are able to swoop in and make suggestions, not just for the things that we own, but for the things that the other teams own, and make feedback. So like init containers are a great example, right? That's nominally owned by the node team. But we need to be really able to say, we can't solve this yet, and here's what we need to go solve it. So maybe what we really need is to try to come up with like a community of practice approach. Like Helm charts are a great way to do that. Like the Helm chart repo will be one of those, but we have to formalize the process really of gathering that data.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. And I think I was thinking to show some really compelling third-party resource use cases, because I think if people understood what they could achieve with third-party resources, we might be able to get better implementations of these things rather than people shoehorning them into things like PetSets, which may or may not be the right fit. I just don't know how that needs to play out in the community, right? We want to make it kind of transparent, and people have the choice to either use a core resource like a PetSet or a replication controller, or choose from a marketplace of custom-built controllers within third-party resources.
That's a really good point.
And one other thing, just to note on the compose, I think we're going to see a rehash of compose. So stay tuned there, because I don't know if compose is going to give swarm mode enough information with the dabs. So you'll probably see a rehash on the dabs and a rehash on compose, because I don't know where that compose API is going to live eventually, but I think they're going to have to get things like storage, and networking across distributed platforms like Swarm embedded in that, metadata that is the compose file. So probably the guys over at Skippbox will have something a little bit more concrete in the future, but at the moment we're kind of poking at things that don't exist in the compose file to map them into Kubernetes objects.
Is that what you experienced when you were doing the DAB to Helm chart conversion? Yeah,
so if you really want to dig into it, there's a little bit clunkiness around networking and the way to describe, I think that's probably because the workflow on the Docker side is people are using Compose, which is an API on the Docker engine. So it's vertically scaled, not horizontally. So it lacks the information to go horizontal. But I think as Compose matures and Swarm matures, you'll probably see an implementation that has that metadata. So the Skippbox guys will be able to infer networking configurations / persistent volumes or volumes.
It's definitely a moving target because the Docker Compose is going to evolve a lot. I totally agree with you with the way that Swarm is going to evolve a lot and probably look a lot more like Kubernetes at some point. They're going to need to add resources, a bunch of stuff. So their API is going to change a lot, I think. So the Compose with a K, if we decide to push forward with that project, we'll need to, it's also a project that's going to keep evolving if we want to use it as a bridge for users to be able to take them from Docker to Kubernetes. So it's a moving target.
What other kind of feedback have you received from the community, Sebastian and Tuna, on Compose with a K? Have you seen a lot of people using it? Are they just looking to go from the Docker ecosystem and into Kubernetes? What kind of use cases have you seen so far?
So we've had a little bit of feedback. I think the project is not yet very well known. So we need to get it out in the wild a little bit more so that people know that it's there and actually use it when they start converting. I think it's always going to be a challenge because Clinton mentioned that even the Docker Compose files are very fragile and they change, and you find one and it doesn't work on your system and things like this. Recently I used the microservices example from Weaveworks, and there's actually a mistake in the Docker Compose file, but they didn't know about it. We figured it out by trying Compose, okay? So, our goal here at Skippbox is if there is interest in the SIG-Apps, is definitely we can put it in the incubator, try to get, more attention to it from everyone who would be interested, and then we would get more feedback. Right now, users, we've had a few bugs filed here and there, but, nothing huge. And we see it as a small utility that's very powerful, but it's not a groundbreaking system.
Okay, thanks for that. Yeah, let's take this demo, internalize it, think about it for a week, go out and use Compose, and then come back to this discussion of whether we want to put this in the incubator, what other kind of interests we have here, where we want to see this project go as well. Does that sound like a plan? Okay.
And there's definitely, the Compose to Cube from KLC. It started roughly at the same time. And then I looked it up yesterday, and there was a little bit of development on Compose to Cube over the summer. I reached out to Brian, Janet, and KLC, and apparently they'll merge toward, Compose K. So
that's great news.
Something to keep in mind.
Awesome. Okay, thank you so much. All right, so next up is the rest of the doc. Clayton, do you want me to share that doc, and do we want to just pick up where we left off?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, great. 1 second.
Where did we leave off? I think the last action item I recorded was job improvements.
Yeah, so I actually went out and used jobs, and I had some thoughts on that, if we want to go back there, if that's okay.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay.
This is your topic, right?
No, it's not my topic. It's Eric's topic.
Yep, but I'm happy to listen, Michelle.
Okay, awesome. Yeah. So actually, Eric was on the call when I was demoing the thing that I was demoing with jobs. So can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. And my big thing was I would really like to be able to collect feedback from a group of jobs, and that was my easily. And so, Eric, do you have any thoughts on that?
Do you want to know their exit status or get their logs?
Logs.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think there's an issue open if there isn't on file one where you could like give a label selector and then ask for logs from all jobs that match that label selector. It'll just give you like the last 10 lines or like tail from a bunch of different jobs. Is that what you would want?
Yeah, that'd be really great. Yeah, I just I know that I can see the pods that failed if I pass in the -A flag now because of you, which is awesome. I just want to see all of that in one log.
There's also the termination log, which in theory is returned in the API as well.
Okay.
That's another angle for very small amounts of output.
Is your goal to debug why it failed or to programmatically wait for completion?
More of why it failed.
Sure. I'll make sure there's an issue and mention you on it or one way or the other.
Okay, that'd be awesome. Thank you. Okay, yeah, deployment improvements. Who was this?
This is McCallus. Is he on? He is on. Although he may not be listening. He's having a mic problem. So you want to come back to this in just a minute if he gets his mic figured out.
That sounds good.
So let's talk about all controllers real quick while he's sorting that out. Because I know replica set was part of deployment. So the hot looping issue, this one, if people aren't aware, like a lot of the controllers have this challenge of if something even slightly out of normal goes wrong, like say an administrator sets up a quota that limits how many pods you can create in your namespace. A number of our controllers don't have a consistent pattern of reacting to bad things happening. And so what they do is they just try as hard as they can to make an impossible thing happen until your cluster eventually dies a horrible death. And depending on where this is, you know, sometimes people don't even notice because the system, you know, throttles those components. In other cases, it is pretty bad. So just across the board, there is a hot looping problem with controllers where controllers need to be a little bit more reactive to when the server tells them they can't do anything. That actually leads into that next issue listed there, which is both raising events as well as something that is actually under the deployment, which is actually conveying that in the replication controller status or the deployment status, that something has gone wrong. So if you have any kind of administrative policy that puts any limits whatsoever on Cube, eventually you hit this, you know, quota, limits, pod security policy, number of ways that you can get rejected from actually getting created and making a consistent. So this is actually something that a number of people I know are working on things around, but if somebody is from the community is looking for a place to, you know, go cut their teeth on a first API object or first API change, this is actually a good one because there's a lot of motivation to help someone succeed here because this is such a usability issue.
Has anyone on this call experienced this issue or any of these issues? Okay, if we do.
Has anyone on this call ever run a Kubernetes cluster with quota turned on? Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I think we're actually, we probably want to get some SIG. Yes, McCall, that you count, but I think like that's actually one thing that we actually do need to make sure we have some representation from is get some folks in SIG-Apps who are running clusters where they're managing either clusters for other people or they're starting to put limits on. I think we're a little one-sided right now in a lot of people are creating their own clusters and they run their own clusters to do stuff, but that that operational perspective, like that the Samsung guys have, and a couple others where they're running a cluster for other people and they put policy in place, has an outsized impact on how well apps run on the platform, but isn't necessarily fully represented yet. So I'll mention that to the SIG operators group.
Let me just give another perspective on that, though, that the stuff that the work that's been going on so far in this area has been fixing stock controllers. But given we just talked today about the importance of encouraging the third-party controller pattern, and those may be written in other languages, may or may not use libraries that we provide, we definitely need to do something on the server side and document the patterns rather than just changing our Go language libraries, which is what we've been doing so far.
Exactly, and stuff like the observe command that I sent that email out to the dev list about, but like things like tools we put in place or patterns, like we really do need to be documenting how you build these things correctly, in evangelizing that sort of stuff. So absolutely. Okay, was there any other comment on the controller stuff?
Is Michaelis the one who's leading this effort?
On the all controller stuff, I think this is a cooperation between SIG API Machinery and a couple of others. The hot looping was opened by David, and the surface failure to create objects. So I think Michaelis is a good point of contact there.
Okay, thanks.
I'll note that. Michaelis, you ready?
Yep, sure. So about deployments.
Yeah.
So you want just an update of status of deployments, the work that is ongoing, or what?
More of what the request from SIG-Apps would be. Where people could get involved. What are the things?
Okay, yeah. So the biggest problem right now with Kubernetes deployments is that there are no reviewers actually, except Janet and sometimes Philip, who does some drive-bys. Me and Michal are working on the OpenShift side, and yeah, I guess if somebody from here could that is not on deployments could start looking at docs and controllers code or whatever contribution can be done from this group would be really appreciated, because yeah.
If you're getting blocked, you can direct message me and I'll try to prioritize reviewing that stuff.
Sure, yeah, because there are some issues that we are trying to upstream for a couple of months now, and it's the lack of reviewing especially is pain.
Escalate to me and we'll figure something out.
Okay.
And Michaelis, do you want to talk a little bit about like the usability / improvements, just real quick? I don't know the things we talked about.
Sure, yeah. So this, I think we already touched on it in the last call. So right now I'm working on the perma-fail pool, which is about fixing, showing to the users useful information in case of failures, which lacks right now in most of our controllers. Yeah. And that's it, I guess.
Okay. And then what under replica set improvements? Was this Brian who put this under here, or?
Yeah, I've been working on some of them, and they're mostly related to usability again. So replica sets, so far you couldn't know stuff like how many pods are running, are ready, how many are available. So Brian wants stuff like min-ready seconds, which is minimum ready seconds from the time that your pods will transition to ready. And stuff like that, we need to move them in replica sets. All of them, those are now in deployments, but it would be really useful to have them on the replica set level.
Okay. Yeah, and for everybody who's not familiar, the like deployments are gated based on readiness checks. But if your readiness check is subject to being RACI, or your app has like a long startup, there's a lot of scenarios where you might actually be ready and then something fails and you crash.
Yeah, some runtime error, yeah.
And so min-ready seconds is really letting an admin letting an app author additionally specify a period of time to smooth out any flakiness. So that makes deployments take longer, but it means that you're a lot more certain that things are going to come up afterwards.
Are we talking about Kubernetes infrastructure crashing or something in your app crashing?
Something in your app crashing. most failures either happen immediately or happen a minute in, especially if you're talking about things like JVMs, where you're talking like initial config, and then you get up and something fails and boot up, and then you crash again. And so you can fix that with readiness checks, but readiness checks themselves aren't perfect, and so giving people an additional tweak point there.
Does that belong on the readiness check of the pod or on the deployment or replica set spec, or maybe now's not the time to design it?
So Brian suggested that we should move at some point milliseconds to the pod level. Right now it belongs in the deployment. It's part of the deployment spec. So we are moving it slowly down to the pod level. Right now there's an issue open about moving to replica sets.
Okay. So I guess the takeaway here is that we have a few people contributing, but this is definitely an area where there's lots of little things that people can help out. So again, another call for contribution to those three items together. Anything else, McCullis?
No.
I do have something to add here. The docs, reviewing the docs for deployments, that seems like a pretty simple task. Does anyone on this call want to volunteer to be involved in that? I like your excitement, Clayton. I can definitely volunteer for this. But if anybody else wants to help out, this seems like a not so involved task. Another just thing to point out is on Helm, we started labeling some issues starter. And I don't know if Core has some kind of label, which basically means, so the starter label on Helm is, this is a good first issue to tackle. It doesn't require a lot of anything super involved, but it's a good way to just get started. So is there anything like that, Clayton or anybody else?
There is.
Okay.
In other SIGs, we just put the @Kubernetes/SIG foo label and that on an issue and say any reviewers, and then that would say like, hey, this is a pretty easy review for anyone that's familiar with the area. Is that an okay use of the SIG-Apps
Yes.
GitHub team?
Are you okay? So who the SIG-Apps GitHub team is actually just me and Matt Farina, as far as I know. So would we add more people to that?
We should figure out a process where we have a pool of like 5 to 10 people that are all reasonably qualified reviewers and that we can blast stuff out to them. Does that seem like a good goal to have for the next quarter?
Yes, I think that's an excellent idea. Does anybody else have feedback on that?
Well, that sounds great. There's also, I think, a difference between a starter and reviewers who can go review this. And I think maybe they are both needed. The idea of having something that's a really low barrier to entry. Somebody says, I just want to show up and contribute something easily, or I want to do something really simple where it just gets me into the code base. That's kind of the starter thing, but to have something to make it easy for somebody to get in. And then a second label that says, hey, we need somebody who's qualified to go review this stuff, who we can poke with that. And so I think those are kind of two not really overlapping groups that are both.
There is a term for the starter thing. It's been a while though since I've looked at it. I think it's help wanted. At least it was at one point, and there was a whole bunch of thought about this and the contribX stuff around enabling this. I haven't heard any of the latest, so we should probably check with that SIG.
Yeah, I feel like every issue that I get on to look at has like help wanted on it, and so it's hard for me personally to tell what is a easy thing to just get started on. But
is help wanted like, oh my gosh, I need help on this, somebody come please help me? Or is it something simple that, hey, this is something easy I can just sink my teeth into without thinking much? And I think that the communication of that is important.
And with labels, like there's at least 4, and probably growing to maybe 8 repos that have stuff that might have a help wanted label that would be relevant to people in the SIG-Apps community. Should they watch that growing set of repos, or do we need another way to like aggregate that and communicate it? I'm not sure what the answer is, but like at least docs, Kubernetes core, Helm, and charts might all have relevant
Yeah,
help on.
that's also a really good point. So yeah, Matt Farina, I really liked your distinction on the difference between starter and needing reviewers. And Eric, I think that you're right. We need more thought on this, on how exactly we want to organize getting help on these across different repos. Let's add these items to something that we need to discuss further so that we don't derail this. But I'm glad we had this conversation.
Okay.
Yeah, oh, go ahead. I was just going to say this might be a good topic for next week if we're done with this.
Absolutely.
Okay, examples. Who is this?
I put that on there. Vic offered to make charts, which is fine. And the other point was a lot of the examples have redundant educational text in them, and I just think we need to get rid of that. If anyone strongly objects, now would be a good time to mention it. Okay, we'll consider that done.
That was so easy. All right.
And then I know we said that we need to follow up on Spark.
I can speak to that a little bit. I have one person who is investigating that. The general approach is to try to make Spark built into Spark Submit and Spark Shell in the same way that Yarn and Mesos have built-in support, and it should just work.
Yes,
not be standalone mode. Probably support cluster mode first, and then maybe eventually client mode.
Okay, so we have some of the people who did the work. So at Red Hat, there's a group of people who did some of the Mesos work for Spark, who are working on like deeper Kube and OpenShift integration. Eric, I can put them in touch with you guys. They've kind of been off. I don't remember what their GitHub repo is, but they've gone pretty far down the path of a lot of this.
Okay.
And they're also doing a lot more stuff. They're doing like UI integration into OpenShift, which probably isn't as relevant, but I'll put you in touch with them.
Please do. I've been working with Tim Chen, who worked on Mesos integration, but I'm happy to have any other resources you have. And do you guys want to be deeply involved in this, or I guess I'll just talk to them and see where we're at?
Yeah, I have not followed their latest. I mean, they're doing like deep like security integration, right? So it comes up fully secure, comes up with signer certs and all that stuff, which is a little bit more on the productization side. But I'll sync you back with them.
Just popping up one level for everyone. Like the goal here is to show everyone knows Kubernetes is a great place to run stateless apps, and then SIG-Apps is teaching people that it's a great place to run stateful apps. And I think big data is kind of that one more piece that we're going in the next 2 quarters. We're going to want to show how well Kubernetes can run, and that these things can all in the future like cohabitate, and you have this one paradigm for managing everything. Apologies if that's obvious to everyone, but like that's kind of a big storyline, I think, for us.
That's thanks for clarifying that. Actually, it's very helpful. There was SIG Big Data or SIG Data Science. I'm not sure who was running that, but are they involved in SIG-Apps now, and should we be asking them to come to these meetings? Clayton, do you know who ran those SIGs?
No, it's funny. It was David handed it off to somebody, and I can't think of who it was.
Okay.
I haven't had an email from them in a while. It was someone who was working. It was someone from Google who was working on a bunch of things, and then some of the Red Hatters who actually were working on that later Spark stuff were involved. But it's been pretty dormant for months. I'll dig that up and add it to the list.
Okay, thanks. I cut somebody off.
Yeah, sorry, Michelle.
No problem.
Quick one, Eric. I have some really interesting use cases for people using big data on Kubernetes in production. And unfortunately, I didn't get it early enough to get it into KubeCon, but what it came down to was a very distilled and targeted set of stuff they needed from the Jobs API that I wanted to feed that back, because basically they built their own system outside of Kubernetes, and I wanted to see if we could get it back in, because I haven't seen any compelling big data built on, big data use cases built on the Jobs API. So should I go and get that in the SIG? What SIG should that be in? I don't want to derail this conversation, but I think.
How about you start with an email to me,
Yep.
at google.com, and then we'll figure out what the form is from there.
Yeah, okay. because it's actually fairly compelling, and I think the big data use case is really compelling.
I want to hear about it. I think for now, this is the right forum. As things happen, we may end up splitting forums just because so much exciting stuff is happening.
And we dropped a Helm chart for Spark that Vic is PRing at the moment. But if you want to...
Is that standalone mode?
I don't know if it's clustered. I think it's standalone mode. No, it's clustered. It's clustered.
I'll take a look.
Take a look
I don't think that has native integration with the Spark code base. So I think it has value now, but it can be even better and have more dynamic scaling using the approach that we're also pursuing. So it's going to be, they're both good.
Yeah, if we can show people some compelling use cases with there's Zeppelin built into it as well. So if we can show people how to use these frameworks on Kubernetes, I think that'll be a great win. So feel free to reach out to me. I authored that chart, but whether it's useful, let's get something that's useful in there if it's not.
Thank you so much, Shalaki. Okay, what, Clayton?
All right.
Spark?
So I don't think we had anything else on Spark then, and then I'll make that note about the Helm chart. I'm going to put Eric Tuna as the coordinator right now on this.
Excellent meeting minute taking, Clayton. Thank you.
I'm more than happy to save you a small amount of time, Michelle, since I know how many notes you take all the time. All right, scheduled job, Eric.
Yeah, this is 1.4. Has anyone played with it or have any using cron already and have any thoughts, needs, seeing the API?
So I had been playing around with it, using it for like operational maintenance tasks that we have on the cluster. So like OpenShift has like a prune command and a couple of other things that go and like trim the graph of cube resources to find things that aren't referenced as like background jobs. And we've been playing around a little bit with it. So running pods that have the command line in it that are getting service account secrets injected worked pretty well. I didn't do any stress testing. I was mostly just playing around with the API, but it was a good start.
Is there anyone on the call that has also used Kronos from Mesos or App Engine cron and or any other clustered cron and just has general feedback either now or, you know, direct message me or put a comment on the doc. Happy to take it. Or just has general opinions about recurring activities.
What else, Eric?
That's all I got for that. I think App Controller is, who owns App Controller at the moment?
It's the folks from Morantis, and they will be on the call next week. We had them scheduled for a demo, but bumped them so that we could talk about this doc. So let's just, let's talk about this next week.
Okay, that sounds good. So that's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
So scheduled job, it's a new resource?
Yes, it is.
Okay. So does it work with Minikube?
It should work with any Kubernetes cluster. It doesn't have any dependencies. It just causes a job to be run. And then if you could run the job on your cluster, then scheduled job can run it at a certain time.
Yeah, so it would be interesting to double check with the guys releasing Minikube because, for example, third-party resources were not supported at some point on Minikube.
Does not use third-party resource. It is a first-party resource.
Yeah, I understand, but sometimes some API resources may not be supported in Minikube because they are in alpha or beta or whatever, and you need a special flag in the API server to turn them on.
Let me look into that.
And that may not be turned on in Minikube because Minikube uses local kube, which has certain settings. So, you know, I filed an issue with the guys from Minikube, but it would really be nice if the Minikube release could make sure that they support all the latest resources by default. Just a thought. Thank you.
That actually triggered another item to add to the list. So there's been discussion over the last couple of weeks from a lot of different folks. I've seen email threads about this. I've seen discussions on other SIGs. We kind of have a problem today where we're not doing a great job of communicating what is in each cube release, whether it's alpha, beta, what that means, and what kinds of feedback we're wanting to gather. I think for app authors, this is something that SIG-Apps probably is pretty well suited to do, is help maintain, so you want to run an app on Cube. And I know that we've had discussions about owning that doc in the past, but that might be something that we can take as a 1.5 item, which is to really improve the docs of how do you bring apps to Cube and the different paths down it, as well as communicating things like, pet sets are alpha, what does that mean? Init containers are beta, what does that mean? And helping smooth that over. I know there were some Hacker News articles where people were complaining because they thought pet sets were GA and we're still saying they're in alpha. So some of that communication, this SIG I think could help with.
Absolutely. Yeah, I myself have that issue. I read all the pet set threads and I'm still like, what's in alpha? What's supposed to be in beta? So I definitely think we could do a better job of that and help there. Okay.
So maybe I was going to suggest, so we've gone through the list. There's a lot of stuff that needs a lot of contribution. I know like on the Red Hat side, most of the folks who we have committed to this stuff are already committed. It might be useful for people to go through, and when they have people that they are planning on having work on some of these items, highlight that. And then if there's anything, like I didn't sound like, just on this call, like I didn't hear anybody say none of this stuff should be in SIG-Apps, right?
I think this was all really relevant.
Okay, so then if maybe for next week, if folks want to go through, and if you're planning on contributing to any of these features or these areas with like a concrete engineering resource, it would be good to put those persons' names down on there, and then that'll help us go through the committed list, which is obviously the committed is the things that people are going to work on, and maybe we could do a desperate appeal for someone to work a little bit less on something else and a little bit not. But I know that just as a group, we'll always have slightly broad interests. So
even if it's a 75% confidence level that you're going to work on it, it's still pretty valuable to put it on there, and we can still make better decisions if we have that information. So don't feel you have to be totally committed to put your name next to an item.
Awesome. So the action item is to go back and review these, and then next week come back and see, hey, I can work on this, or I can devote some time and resources. Do we want to make a spreadsheet for that? How do other SIGs talk about committing to particular items?
Obsessive spreadsheet creation is generally the pattern.
Okay.
Eric, do you have a couple of good examples? I've seen a couple. I'm not sure which ones I think are the best. Quinton's was the most detailed from SIG Federation.
I mean, typically, people who make major contributions, not always, but often work for a company that also pays them money. And so typically those companies, not say it's the only way, they identify things that are most important to them, and those are going to get a definite, and usually there's not overlap. If there is, those people talk to figure out how they're going to handle it. And then whatever's left is sort of a backlog of like, not critical for anyone, but still important. And so then we go back through that, and everyone who's sort of just committed to the project in general, but doesn't have a specific need, will sort of say, we're going to devote X amount of bandwidth to these other tasks. And then we give the ones that are sort of business critical, like a priority 1, and then we give priority 2 to ones that are like kind of grungy, but like we need to get those done for the health of the project. And we make sure that every quarter we have some non-zero priority 2 bandwidth. That's how I think about it.
Okay, awesome. All right, that's our time. Thanks everyone for joining. I think this was a really productive meeting, and I'm really looking forward to next week's meeting. We have some commitments to outline. We'll talk about a little process stuff, and we'll definitely get the lowdown on what app controller is all about and where that's at. So next week should be exciting as well. Anyway, have a great week. Thanks.